of the story. The beautiful princess married the handsome prince, and as usual, they lived happily ever afterwards. Well, Ariane. Oh, look at the time. We should have been in bed ages ago. Come on, come on.
What's that thing up on the mantelpiece, Uncle? Just a pretty thing that followed it.
You mean this?
Yes.
Oh, sit here, Ariane, and I'll tell you the whole story. You see, it happened just like this.
The trial started before a big crowd on a sunny day at Bondi in Sydney. Car number 1 rolled away, and we had 7,000 hard, uncertain miles to go. Quite a few were knocked out early. Former world boxing champion Jim Carruthers and former Australian champion Carlo Marchini, for example, took the count in the first 400 miles. For Evan Green, director of the trial, the start meant the end of months of planning. Doug Hughes of Melbourne got away nicely and kept going nicely too. 3 Sydney fashion models, Maureen Lanigan, Barbara Turnbull and Patsy Owens, started in their first trial. They didn't win a prize, but they went all the way round, more than I did in my first trial. For Grandma Blanche Brown and her 1927 Rolls-Royce, it was their third and toughest AMPOL trial. Happy Jack Witter, 1957 AMPOL trial winner, started in a skiing jacket. A trial without Jack Murray, then 4 in a field of 148. I had Bill Murray, no relation Jack, thank heavens, as co-driver, and Bill Murison, top Chrysler engineer, as my mechanic and cigarette lighter. Pam McGee dropped the flag for us, and hi-ho, we were on our way. We would have finished without a mark on our Chrysler, but this fate didn't lie in store for Brian and Pamela Powell and Dorothy Rosewell in car 1. The cheerful lass in the center is Jean, wife of Doug Hughes. She went with Betty Hughes and Iris Mountford. In the afternoon sunshine, we all rolled smoothly over Sydney Harbour Bridge, heading north up the Pacific Highway, with 1,000 dusty, winding and hard miles to go to Brisbane. At Wyong, goodbye highway, and slap bang into a tight elimination section that had the cars and crews battling to save seconds. The cars had to move, and the navigators had to run to clock in on time. Daybreak found the cars hiking down a narrow mountain pass from Armidale to Kempsey. Malcolm Brooks, an early leader, made good time. So did the Garrard brothers in car 42. These boys ran third in the 1957 AMPOL trial, and they went mighty close to winning this one. Right on their tail, Victorian Stan McGlashan was certainly pushing time around this corner. But old-timer Len Aylward, competing in his 5th round Australia trial, took the same corner as though he were on a Sunday drive. At Kempsey, roughly halfway to Brisbane, we were on time. South Australian Laurie Saunders was late. During the night, Laurie did 3 somersaults over a bank near Dungog. A stock car driver, he drives them better when they're bent. We rolled on past the scenic beauty of northern New South Wales coastal resorts like Nambucca Heads. On into the dusk, then, as night fell, into neon-lit surfers' paradise. Finally on to Brisbane, where Saunders arrived without a second to spare. Racing driver David Mackay got lost, and lost points near Wyong. but still made it easily to Brisbane. There was no charge for the soup. Look at Saunders. Must be Scotch broth. Next day revealed that Laurie's car wasn't the only one to crash on the first night of the trial. Trevor Shelley in car 79 and Ron Dunbier joined the N for Enders Club. Victorians Leo Shallard and Ian Jackson lost their windscreen, but there wasn't even a speck of dust on our Chrysler. I didn't know until Brisbane that there was a galah in the trial. I thought he was fishing at Tangalooma. After 12 hours rest, Jeff Haggerty and Bill Jones, followed by Malcolm Brooks, led the cars out of Brisbane. The Garrards came next, and a gay young lady, obviously waiting for me, gave them the big wave. Miles north of Brisbane, and we were in the rough stuff again, on a stretch of road between Kilcoy and Nambour, with the spectacular Glasshouse Mountains in the background. It was a road of sudden twists and turns, sharp bends that slowed up drivers like Alan Lawson of Toowoomba in car 18, that made experienced trial drivers like Jack Witter and Bill Burns in his Jaguar, and our other adversary in the big car class, Ron Gwinsel in his custom line, take things carefully. Terrific country and terrific driving. Plume of dust marked the progress of Les Cousins of Sydney in his Holden. Les drove all the way round with an AMPOL sign on the roof of the car. Kingaroy brothers Kevin and Doug Parker took this corner carefully in their new Holden. You'll see this car again, but not looking like that. After a night's rest at Bundaberg, the cars paused at dawn at the start of another hard elimination section on the long run to Toowoomba. Bill Robinson in car 67 hit another car in the dust and later withdrew. Ron Preston of Sydney ran off the road in low-hanging dust, but got going again after the camera crew towed him out. Dust and sudden creek crossings are always hazards. This was a Volkswagen driven by Ingolf Leuschner, a German New Australian from Wangaratta. Now you see what happened when a creek engulfed Ingolf. Luckily he wasn't hurt, but his VW was very wonky. In the dust, South Australian Archie Gibbs missed a corner, uprooted a sapling and crashed against a tree. Safety belt saved Gibbs and his mates from injury. Another South Australian crew, Kevin Fisher, John Kerr and Des Ryan in car 69, also bit the dust in the dust. Veteran Len Aylward was unluckiest of all. There wasn't much left of his Holden when it capsized after he'd sportingly pulled over to let another car pass. Next day at Toowoomba, dust gave way to misty rain and fog. We got on our way in a heavy fog. The dampness affected the good spirits even of Jack Murray, and believe me, it takes some really dull weather to do that. We followed Granny Brown's Rolls Royce as we headed south for sunny New South Wales, but there wasn't anything. And there wasn't anything to sing about, but we sang our heads off just the same. On the way, we passed Dorothy Rosewell doing a spot of navigating for Brian Powell as car 149 sped towards the New South Wales border. Kids from the bush schools lined the roads and cheered us on our way. But this old boy played it safe. He kept right off the highway. Next day at Tamworth, we met up with the models and Malcolm Brooks for the first time since leaving Sydney. The girls had lost a lot of points, but none of their charm. Brooks was still up with the leaders, his vanguard none the worse for a bump against a tree in Queensland. Tamworth good roads took us west to Dubbo. On the way, Jim Hazelton and the trial plane and Laurie Saunders both indulged in some low flying. On to Dubbo and an al fresco meal, if that's what you could call a meat pie and half of Jack Murray's bottle of lolly water. Laurie Saunders ate with the same gusto with which he rolls his car. So did Witter. Granny Brown and Kath Price took tea like ladies. But my talk with David Mackay was disturbed with a jerk. The jerk was that maniac Murray and his water pistol. Except that we were in a hurry, I'd have had him hauled off to a home. We cruised on past the glorious sun-dappled scenery of the Kapiti Valley. On through the dusk to a night stop at Orange. Next day, we were headed south, with Bert Hines and Bill Dennison making the dust fly, little realizing that ill luck lay before them.
Then, we went into another very tough section near the Wyangla Dam.
Ron Dunbier pounded into a sharp creek crossing. Right behind came car 158 with hard-driving young Don Garrard at the wheel. He's sliding. Oh, he's over the edge. Yep, he's in. Things Dave Bartlett saw from his little plane. Tubby Black of Terrigal made it by tearing through full bore in second gear. Behind him, Doug Hughes and Queenslander Kevin Hogan followed his example. A cheery welcome to Victoria, a quick meal at Wodonga, then with Malcolm Brooks leading the way and still leading the trial, we sped on over good Victorian roads to Ballarat. Keith Sheedy and Eric Main and their Dauphine battled on despite 3 rollovers. North of Ballarat, the Garrards was still near the front. On we went through Victorian country towns. Veteran Ron Mountford had 2 cars to worry about, his own and his wife's. But at this stage, neither Stella Hall of Tamworth nor the Garrard boys had any worries. They were to come later. We received a grand welcome at Kerrang in northwest Victoria, and so did Granny Brown. But her son Vince, who did most of the driving for her, was worried about an ominous noise in the old car's motor. The big welcome went to the models. They were at the back of the field, but their car was in good shape, and so were they, even though a little disheveled. A big smile from Barbara Turnbull sent us on our way, headed for Mildura. The models followed behind us. Ahead, beyond the sunset, lay a 600-mile night drive to Port Augusta in South Australia. Daybreak found a cluster of tired cars and exhausted crews at Port Augusta for 6 hours of welcome rest. Iron Man Vince Brown was so tired he didn't move from behind the wheel. The crews slept where they stopped, where they sat, everywhere and anywhere. The models, being models, were more concerned with beauty treatment than beauty sleep. But Dave Johnson, Jack Murray's navigator, wasn't so fussy. Dorothy Rosewell trimmed the driver's whiskers, while Norm Porter operated on his own. Iris Mountford and the Hughes girls were last in and were very tired. And you should have seen Jack Murray. He lost any chance of winning the trial during the night when Dave Johnson took him 50 miles up a wrong road. Jack covered his disappointment by clowning with Dorothy. Once an audience gathered, no one could stop him. For the benefit of the boys and the girls, he awarded Dave the Order of the Axe. Then Dave was banished with a kick in the slats for good measure. After Port Augusta, the miles rolled past under us. On to Whyalla, where AMPOL will build its new super tanker. On through Adelaide and then east again, heading for Victoria. Les Cousins was still with us as we approached the border, and that AMPOL sign was still intact on the roof of the Holden. Good roads, with an occasional detour, as we streamed towards Bordertown. Tony Harbert in his midget Lloyd Hartnett was late into Bordertown. He scored a near miss, too near for my liking, on our Chrysler as he skidded up to the control without a second to spare. Bordertown, we coasted on to Narrowcourt, Larry Saunders' hometown. We arrived in time to see the welcome Laurie received from his family and friends. We had an hour for a meal, so we decided to make it rather a dignified occasion by tendering Laurie a welcome home dinner. To keep it dignified, we didn't invite Jack Murray. Just as well. Jack and Dave continued their argument about who lost who at a table nearby. Such behavior. Then, just as I was about to propose the toast that Laurie be spared from any more rollovers, the party was gate-crashed by Jack Murray, who can trace his family tree right back to the time when his ancestors still lived in it. All I can say is I'm glad Murray didn't bring his water pistol.
The things I let that Jack Murray do to me.
After busting up our party, Murray descended on the models. What is this? A hug or a monkey wrench? With the horseplay over, we were on our way again, heading for Hamilton in Western Victoria. By now, the Rolls-Royce was running on 5 cylinders with a counterweight where the 6th used to be. Vince Brown deserved a medal, not a busted piston, as a souvenir for the job he did with this old car. That afternoon found us driving in bleak weather along the Great Ocean Road on the southern coast of Victoria, heading for windswept Port Campbell and probably the toughest section of the whole trial. Everyone made a fast getaway from Port Campbell. Ahead was 68 miles of tortuous road, inches deep in mud, to a pond. Just before we left, a dear old lady gave me a box of crayfish. We forgot we had them, but they reminded us themselves 2 days later. This section brought the leaders to grief. 5 inches of rain had turned the road into a quagmire. Brooks, co-leader with Ron Green to Port Campbell, became bogged. Green was pocketed behind a 20 miles per hour private car for many miles. Our only complaint was that there wasn't another 60 miles of the mud. This was a real big car specialty. Here we come with my co-driver Bill Murray at the wheel. Ron Green follows right behind us with George was on his tail. Next day, Melbourne. Sunny Melbourne for a change. As Leo Shallard led the cars out on the last lap to Sydney, the Garrard brothers had moved to a slender lead. They didn't hold it for long. They must have looked at the map upside down because they lost their way and the lead not far out of Melbourne. We took things quietly through the Melbourne suburbs. About all Bill Murison had to do was to keep me in cigarettes. We paused for a while at Warburton, a delightful resort town in the high timber country 40 miles out of Melbourne. As this timber truck eased past us and the 2 smiling cops helped keep the kids back, another policeman was engaged in more serious duties 10 miles away on a mountainside. Bill Dennison and Bert Hines in their shiny Holden had tangled with a timber jinker on a corner. We got there just as ambulance men were preparing to take Bill to hospital. Luckily, thanks to his safety belt, he wasn't badly hurt and was up and about next day. But their Holden, well, it can still be a Sydney taxi. This is where the Garrard boys lost their way. It was a section of winding mountain roads. You had to drive well and clock in quickly to stay on time. At dawn, we saw the result of the most incredible accident of the whole trial. Remember 106 and 149? Well, near Welshpool in Victoria, Doug and Kevin Parker and Brian and Pamela Powell and Dorothy Rosewell rolled end for end 300 feet off the road at the same place within half an hour. All were using safety belts, and they all walked away. Just imagine 5 people unhurt in a dual crash like this. Daybreak also brought new leaders. Young Don Garrard and Ambulance Superintendent Jim Roberts of Liverpool in Sydney in their Holden 158. At Orbost, after Don had been at the wheel for nearly 7,000 miles, they were down only 9 points. 3 of them lost when they became bushed in the streets of Ballarat. Doug Hughes was 1 point behind them. At this stage, our main adversary in the big car class was Bill Burns and his Jaguar. He got past this obstacle, but his car blew a gasket soon after he crossed the border into New South Wales. Vince Brown battled on 5 cylinders to finish 8th in the big car class. Stella Hall got as far as Coomer, then a broken stub axle ended her gallant effort. It's times like these that make you realize what good friends policemen really are. We spent the last night in Canberra, and a misty dawn pushed on to Sydney. With 100 miles to go, Roberts and Garrard were still 1 single point in front. Witter's Volkswagen shared 2nd place with Doug Hughes, with a Zephyr and a Peugeot in 4th and 5th position. At Wollongong, John Garrard Sr., Don's father, who finished 3rd with his other sons in the 1957 AMPOL trial, was there as late them. On to Bondi, where 70 welcome to the winners of Australia's greatest trial. No wonder Jim Roberts looks pleased. He and Don collected £2,500 in prize money and won a round-the-world flight by Qantas. Last year's winners, Jack Witter and Doug Stewart, who went within a point of doing it again, received a terrific reception. They shared £2,500 with Doug Hughes. Gene Hughes got to the finish by aeroplane, in time to give Doug a congratulatory kiss. Then we drove in to finish 8th and win the big car class. Pam McGee, the lass who flagged us away, was waiting to greet us. So Dorothy Rosewell, who flew up with Jim Hazelden. Granny Brown and Kath Price were there too with that, and so were the models. 5th last, but still beautiful. So the trial ended. All that remained was for me to collect checks worth £600, which went to the boys, and my trophy, my first trophy. You know, it took me 6 round Australia trials and a fall-off a motor scooter to win it.
Well, that's the whole story. And though I've been a little modest, what do you think of your Uncle Jack now as a driver? Eh? Well, what do you know? These days you can't compete against Westerns. And so to bed. Come on, Harry Ann. Time we went to bed. You to dream about whatever little girls dream about. And Uncle Jack to lie there and think just how good I'm going to be in the AMPOL trial of 1959.
On reflection now, I suppose the trial didn't really end until those last few steps up to the stage. Not for all of us, of course, but certainly for Lucette and Jean-Claude Auger and Hans Schuller and Edgar Herrmann. 2 of the greatest rally teams in the world who, in a highly practical Franco-German entente, split first prize in Australia's longest, toughest, richest trial. It was, of course, the event of the bicentenary. A field of 201 in a simultaneous start from 5 cities. 36 from Melbourne, including Herman and Schuller in their Datsun Triple S. Bruce Hodgson and Graham Hoynville in their Ford Falcon 500. Jack Forrest and John Bryson in a luxury Citroën. Even former world boxing champion Johnny Famechon. The Augiers and 23 others started from Brisbane, among them John Smith and Noel Che from New Guinea. Queenslanders Rex Law and Amos Smith and Barry Arentz running in his second AMPOL trial. How would the Augiers fare? That was the puzzle. Would last-minute ill luck rob Jean-Claude of his 36 cars started from Adelaide, with Eddie and Larry Perkins carrying Citroen's colours as teammates for the Augiers, along with another South Australian hope, Alison Parker and Carol Waldron, in the women's section. There were 17 from Perth, rivals and colleagues. London, Sydney, London, Mexico City veteran Ken Tubman and navigator Lynn McLeod. Colleagues, Bob Bullock's Volvo team. Rivals, let's face it, all. My Volvo, theirs, or Tubman's Triumph 2.5. Let me save Sydney for last, with Bondi dressed in Sydney's bicentenary regalia, right down to Captain Cook.
To witness such evidence of courage, initiative, and endeavor. I have been told that as well as here at Bondi, there are courageous men and women in Perth, Adelaide, Melbourne, and Brisbane at this moment, ready to embark on a journey across this vast continent. Before I dispatch you intrepid helmsmen and navigators, let me express my amazement at your means of conveyance. Your carriages can traverse distances on land which took me 10 months by sea, God providing favorable winds. I admit that my ships were not built for speed, but I am sure that your carriages similarly put reliability first. All the more power to you 20th century adventurers. Go forward with courage.
88 of us kicked off from Bondi. Bright, jolly, nerve-taut, wisecracking with Joe Martin. But for all of us, whether Holden's wily fox Harry Firth with 3 entries, David Mackay, or the newest novice, the question uppermost in our minds was, how tough was the 10,000 miles that lay ahead? How well would our machine stand up to it? How much stamina would we need for 15 days and nights across the continent Cook had skirted 200 years before? Away north and westward, 1,500 miles to Port Augusta. For some, by midnight, western New South Wales, an early end for car 145. John Monaghan's Fiat was in a collision just outside Nyngan. Luckily, no one seriously hurt. By morning, the outback, where signposts still point to the post office, and country policemen came 200 miles to see the field go by. Then the Darling, the Flying Doctor Base, and 20 miles further on, Broken Hill. Time out for John and Paul Jensen of Mount Isa. 3 cars can't go through a grid simultaneously.
We took on this decoration about 100 miles the other side of Wilcannia, Brian. I was coming through fairly fast on the outside of a row of traffic in heavy dust. The third road suddenly ran out and there was a grid, and we sort of wound ourselves around it, picked up a bruised dignity and an injured arm. We'll be moving in about 35 minutes from now. We've got to be in Port Augusta by 8:15 tonight.
And so were we all, across the border and due in Port Augusta by nightfall. 200 from seaboard to seaboard. $1 million worth of machinery converging on Port Augusta. Then to endure a common rally route the next day, 1,161 miles to Alice Springs, through the silent, hard granite country of the Flinders Ranges, through a strange land with strange names. Partacuna, Top Bore, Depot Springs, Arkaroola, the first of the hard roads, and for Herman and Schuller, the grand Australian tradition, opening and closing station gates. The ranges are breathtaking. The road, something less. And through Partacuna Control, a tent in the wilderness, forerunner of many. Falcon number 35, Bruce Hodgson and Graham Hoynville, lacing the dust with their engines roaring, speeding to ultimate victory in the rally to Alice. The field, however, was not yet sorted out, but being sorted out. Full bore for top bore, the Augiers running in with a clean sheet at the end of the easiest stage of a bone-shaking 250 miles. The clock, our relentless master, with Hodgson and Hoynville, and Ken Tupman in his triumph for the time being, more than obedient to it. Beyond this point, where bitumen is only an illusion, the track runs where railway and farms surrender, and sheet the colour of dust scatter across the stony hillsides. Few cars escape suspension or other underbody trouble. A real car breaker that was to revive all the incredible stories of past Round Australia trials. Copley was a way station for fuel and sandwiches and something to ease dusty throats. What can I say about colleague John Pearce's overalls except that they matched his car seat covers? And no matter where we went, the service teams, some from abroad, plugged their way round to see their charges safely off and meet them again, they hoped, at the next service point. Not one of us was to clean sheet the run from Copley to Depot Springs, a run that took us past remote homesteads and steep gorges cut by tree-lined, silent creeks. Eddie Perkins at this stage was down 5 points. The Fords had the best of it. Hodgson and Kilfoyle down only 1 and 2 points. Then on 4 points for John Kieran in his Monaro, the Augiers and Bob Bullock's Volvo. The rest of us trailed behind and into the dusk. Drive 3 miles east along the creek bed, the route instructions said. Take care of rocky gutters and boulders. And don't, it might have added, don't whatever you do, roll over. Otherwise, you'll have to stop and fix it. The Augiers had a trouble-free run, but at Lyndhurst they played safe and fitted new brake pads. On the other hand, Herman and Schuller rolled over, but made it to Oodnadatta. There had been, Schuller explained, a moment of indecision. Confronted with a side track, hands hesitated and flipped in a sandy creek bed. Daybreak at Oodnadatta, a battered field, experts and novices, spread-eagled alike. Breakfasting at the old camel grader that now serves as a barbecue at the Oodnadatta pub. John Famersham summed up the night.
Well, rally, but shocking it is. Don't know how a car can get through it.
Would you sooner fight or rally?
Oh, I'd sooner fight, I think. I'd sooner fight.
Out of Oodnadatta, the last lap in the rally section. Alice Springs in the offing, a night's rest there, and then next day, the start of the trial. In the meantime, flat, forlorn, featureless and lonely. No crowds to cheer us on, just ourselves, crazy strangers roaring across the timeless earth, disturbing the silence to keep an appointment with time. Those of us who could, that is. However we could. Ken Tupman made it to the outskirts of Alice on a semi-trailer with a rock hole in the diff of his Triumph. The Jensens also made it and went on to win the novice rally from Brisbane. Ford took honours in the rally, 7 points up on John Kieran and Roger Bonholm, who tried to win for the Holden dealer team. In Alice Springs, Bruce Hodgson and Graham Hoynville were very happy. Down only 2 points, $1,000 richer. Their Falcons still sound for the trial. A remarkable achievement. And to greet and farewell us, a special East-West charter brought Captain Cook, Sydney's Lord Mayor Emmett McDermott, and Rear Admiral George Oldham, Federal Coordinator of the Bicentenary, plus a stock of Sydney's Bicentenary regalia loaned by the Lord Mayor. Meantime, like actors backstage before curtain, we competitors had a busy night preparing for the trial start. Herman and Schuller's battered Datsun for one. The Japanese service crew to the Colts. Next day, with the early morning crisp and cool as a wintry desert sunrise should be, the trial began. 159 survivors of the 201 rally starters, out in numerical order, each 2 minutes apart. We started early so that film of the scene could go on television in capital cities 1,000 miles away the same night by courtesy of Qantas. For this vital job, they flew to Alice their sleek HS-125 training jet, which set fastest time in the London-Australia Bicentenary Air Race. Captain Stan Beeson gave a hand while the cameras rolled. Then he was off with his bags of film. He reached Sydney in 3 hours. A journey that was to take us 11 days. We drove out under some of Sydney's bicentenary decorations, past the John Flynn Memorial Church, past 2 bemused and supremely optimistic young Americans seeing the country. Jean-Claude and Lucette Auger, 2 of France's most distinguished drivers who married after the London-Sydney Marathon, had nursed their Citroën in the rally. Now they were out to win the main event. So were big game hunter Edgar Herman and his cool compatriot Hans Schuller. They believed their Triple S could repeat their win in the 1970 East Africa Safari. Few others did. In Alice, after their rollover, the cynics had them 50-1. Able South Australian Gary Chapman, who drove for the Ford team in the London-Sydney, but competed privately in a Capri in this event, turned the first trial stage into a tourist run. With 14 hours, 41 minutes to cover 692 miles along the bitumen, there was time enough for photographs at the Devil's Marbles. En route, Tennant Creek. Brisbane's Ann Thompson proved that women are never at a loss as to what else they can do at a refuel point. And neither, it turned out all along the way, were school children when given time off to see the cars go through. With another 300 miles to cover, we had only to keep the sun at our backs. And the road would bring us well ahead of time to May Downs, off the bitumen, the start of a brutal competitive section outside Mount Isa. Not resting so much as storing energy, nerves and reserves for the wild dash across May Downs into Isa. 1 hour, 15 minutes to traverse 45.5 miles. The first real crunch of the trial. No service vehicles this section. Extreme care, rocky outcrops, numerous creek crossings. That's what the rule said. All was calm, but there was tension behind the calm. Car 1, Daniel and Slide, tough Tasmanian miners, slid off into the darkness, the bull dust and the creek crossings. We didn't see them again. And And into the lamp-lit Mount Isa control. Not car 1, 2, 3, or 4 behind the blazing headlights. Forrest and Bryson. A good run, but ultimately not good enough. Down 5 points. Richie Harris and Nigel Collier in their rotary-engine Mazda clung grimly to the leaders. 18 points. On a cow track that hadn't been graded in 10 years. This section established John Kieran in his Flying Monaro, Bob Watson and Jim McAuliffe in their Renault 16 TS, and Western Australian novice John Williamson in his Toyota Crown as trial leaders, the only cars to clean sheet this section. Also acquitting themselves well with only 2 points lost, the pride of La Belle France. Jean-Claude smiled non-committally at his first experience of a Queensland bush track. Frank Kilfoyle in his Falcon 500, like the Ogiers, found the dust and the Sandy Creek crossings the main problem. To let the dust settle, cars went through every 4 minutes instead of the usual 2-minute intervals. Bob Bullock's Volvo lost 7 points. The Perkins Citroën finished with 8, and there were 3 cars on 9, including David Mackay's Citroën. We lost 23. Moderately satisfied with 20 points lost, a cheerful Ken Tubman, so we weren't in bad company. Daylight, another rough run, 44 miles in 55 minutes to a cattle station called Bushy Park. Chapman's Capri down only 1 point. Barry Ferguson's Holden down 8 points. At this stage, the Ogiers and their white Citroën were 5th on 2 points. Frank Kilfoyle, Australian rally champion, and his navigator Doug Rutherford, well placed on 12. The mentor is Big Al Turner, boss man of Ford's Special Vehicles Division. Turner's job is to care and plan for Kilfoyle, Bruce Hodgson, and Jack Ellis, the aces in the Ford team. Herman and Schuller were down 6 points. And here we are, still on 23. That's my co-driver, Bill Nolan. And that's a familiar face. From here on, wherever dust permits, you'll see the striking colours of the Renault team. Joint leaders Watson and McAuliffe are in car 38. The car particularly to watch for is Monaro 39, boring in behind the VW, while John Kieran and his navigator Roger Bonholm. Whenever he could, Kieran conferred with Harry Firth, manager of the Holden dealer team. At Bushy Park, with 6,500 miles to go, for Kieran and Firth, everything was coming up roses. But there were 6,500 miles to go. Join us then, heading east across western Queensland for the green-clad tropical coast. And into Kilfoyle's dust go the 2 leaders. Past Cloncurry and Hughenden, the night run to Cooktown took a heavy toll, and day dawned dull with drizzly rain. When Alex Gorshinen's white Mercedes slipped by, Kieran was already in, but overnight he'd lost the lead. The Ogiers, down 7, were in front. Kieran and Gary Chapman were equal second, only a point behind. Watson and McAuliffe were another point behind third. But like Famo, all we wanted to do was put our heads down and sleep. An instant population explosion turned a ghost town into a tent town and boom city for a day to celebrate Captain Cook's landing there 200 years before, almost to the day. And when one car runs into the back of another, damage can always be assessed good-humouredly. Above all, good humour is what trial drivers really need. In the pub, the town's gold rush boom days are recalled in oils. mural is a traditional tourist attraction, and so, naturally, is the museum, which was once a convent, with pride of place to one of Captain Cook's recently recovered cannons. A slightly rueful Bob Watson could take his mind off the tribulations of trialling. Cook's tribulations were largely over at Cooktown, with Endeavour tied to this tree, beached and under repair. Perhaps it meant good luck for Barry Burns and Ray Glendenning, who were destined to take out the novice prize. But the night ahead spelled disaster for Johnny Famishon and his Melbourne teammates, John Graham and John Ashton. Their ostrich slid in loose gravel into the side of a cutting, putting them in Mariba Hospital. Famishon with a ruptured spleen. The rest of us were grateful to get to Townsville. The Cooktown section had been rough. Testimony in Townsville. Perkins had broken down. The Ogiers complained that in parts the road was fit only for four-wheel drive vehicles. Alan Hamilton's Porsche crashed outside Mount Garnet. John Pierce was knocked out with the broken sump. Others just gave up. The new leader was John Kieran on 14 points. The Ogiers next on 17. It was a good place for Lucette to get a flat tyre with John Bryson ready and willing to help a lady in distress. Elsewhere, in many workshops, frenzied repair work was underway. Our Volvo only needed half a pint of oil. Well, of course. Out of Townsville, ahead of us, more competitive sections. 32 miles from the abandoned gold town of Ravenswood to Clare. Time allotted, 46 minutes to allow for, as our route instructions had it, straying stock, numerous creek crossings and mountain roads. Observe warnings. Light boring through the darkness like Ravenswood's phantoms afoot again. First into Clare, the Ogiers, clean-sheeted, but still in second place behind Kieran. Just 2 minutes behind the French couple, coping with their dust, Frank Kilfoyle and Doug Rutherford. In on time. No points lost, but down 30 overall. No wonder Frank was in a hurry. Herman and Schuller dropped 3 points, making their total 25. Right on their tail, Jack Forrest in Citroën number 5, 33 points. Driving one car ahead of our Volvo, David Mackay's Citroën was also 33 points down at Clare. Up to this stage, luck had not been with Colin Bond, Brian Hope and Tony Roberts in another Holden dealer's Monaro. But with Bond on 44 points and Kieran on 14, Holdens were in front in the team score. Our own situation out of Clare and heading for Mackay was pretty good. We were down 61 points. We lost 23 south of Cooktown. At Mackay, Jean-Claude slept. But John Kieran, as ever, was really switched on. The rest of the control was a bustle. Outside Mackay, Watson and McAuliffe had an incredible piece of bad luck. An electrical fire cost them 12 points and joint second place. The Renault service team replaced their alternator, but nothing could replace the 12 points. And that, after all, is what it's all about. Points lost and points not lost. Edgar Herman's concern was sleep not lost. Roaring out of the dawn, the leader, Kieran. We were coming out of one of the most exhaustive sections in Queensland. 69 miles across Connors Range from Tirrawumba to St. Lawrence. Mackay was 6 hours behind us and Rockhampton only a couple of hours ahead. Kieran took off as though his life depended on it. Bruce Hodgson was backing up his rally win with a handy 4th position in the trial. Watson and McAuliffe's task was making up lost ground. For them, it was a waiting game, waiting for the leaders to slip. Gary Chapman and Peter MacArthur, with no intention of slipping, were third in their surprising Capri. Some Queensland roads mightn't be so hot, but there's nothing wrong with Queensland hospitality. As we learned at Rockhampton, a certificate for crossing the Tropic of Capricorn, Frank Kilfoyle got a special reward. Harry Firth and Big Al Turner were more serious-minded, as befits men with a big stake in the outcome of the trial. After Rockhampton came more rough, competitive sections. Ken Tubman, down 182, was now out of the calculations. But this was the nature of the trial. Long touring runs on reasonable roads, enabling works teams to rebuild with time to spare, mixed with short, tight, competitive sections that really sorted out the field. Coasting to Brisbane, we recalled some odd things we'd seen. Dave Old and his mates in the old Mercury carrying their gear over Connors Range to get to the top. A Mini that had to reverse up. And above all, the toughness of May Downs and the Cooktown sections. At Brisbane, positions were clear for the run south. Kieran first on 14. Then the Augiers on 17. Chapman on 23, Hodgson on 24, and Herman and Schuller on 25. Jean-Claude and Lucette were back where they started from, but the Brisbane crowd had their first look at the winners of the East Africa Safari. After Brisbane came 2 competitive sections over the McPherson Ranges to Warwick. First tail slide to Frank Kilfoyle, nicely checked. Herman and Schuller. Jack Forrest and John Bryson, 8th with 33 points lost, but only hours away from a crash that would put them out altogether. Colin Bond, and behind him the hare that set the pace, John Kieran, the fast man. The Colts were starting to come on, particularly Doug Stewart. So was David Mackay. But Eddie Perkins was to come to grief on a sudden mountain crest hairpin bend. But meantime, Barry Ferguson's Monaro, and thundering behind him, still third, Chapman and MacArthur in their gallant Capri. Below the ranges nestled Warwick and southward, the Dusk, the Border and New South Wales. More competitive sections. On to Narrabri, and by nightfall a 10-mile stock route laced with gates, creeks and other hazards. As they swept through a gravel creek bed, a blowout ended the hopes of Jack Forrest and John Bryson. Their Citroën rolled and became a twisted wreck. When police arrived, Bryson told them graphically how seatbelts had saved Forrest and him from serious injury. For car 5, the trial was over. Bryson was disappointed but cheerful. For a sport like him, there's always a next time. The run to Narrabri cost all the leaders points, but didn't alter the placings. At dawn, Kieran, still the leader, was 1 point further down, but hammering out the pace the last few miles into Wagga. 1 day's rest in Wagga, and we could wake in the evening to rain and mud and the first greasy conditions since Cooktown. 700 miles to go to Adelaide, we were conscious that the sections ahead in the darkness might well produce surprises. They did. For John Kieran, it was to be the last section in which he'd set the pace as leader. A wet start. A place called San Isidore. A bad beginning. The Augiers clean-sheeted. Herman and Schuller dropped a point, officially, that is, because they disputed it. Kieran, clean. 400 miles further on, the road became a track. Gary Chapman, Barry Ferguson, and ourselves got into Bordertown by a route through western Victoria's sand and swamp mallee country. Here, past Big Billy Bore, Moonlight Tank, and Wagon Flat, John Kieran came to grief. First, a rear wheel bearing collapsed. Then he bogged in an infamous sand section. The fast man's race was done. We were waiting for him. Now the Augiers led from Herman and Schuller, Chapman and MacArthur. Their grip on third place, seemingly secure, dined well. Breakfast without Kieran seemed odd. Of the 10 leading cars, 3 were Colts, Doug Stewart's doing best with only 45 points lost. A remarkable achievement for the Japanese lightweights. From here on, the team's event would be a struggle between Ford and Mitsubishi. But there was champagne for all on the outskirts of Adelaide, including the grateful crew of car 29. We were down 122 points. Just one half of them lost when we couldn't find a blasted gate in Kieran country. Herman and Schuller, 10 points behind Jean-Claude and Lucette, were patiently counting on them making one mistake, a hope that seemed slim at this stage. While the new leaders were fated, the old one came in to tell his own story. Next day into Victoria and on to Melbourne. There was little Kieran could do to make up the leeway of 123 points, because the roads through the rain-swept Grampians weren't designed for making up time. On some, we were guaranteed to bog, and others were so bad that the trial organisers called the sections off and rerouted us. Jerry Lister was driving our Volvo magnificently with Bruce Collier and his taped-down bonnet hard on our hammer. Melbourne was a night city, seen first from the impound and then only briefly. It was a time for stock-taking, not sightseeing. We'd been 12 days on the road with 3 to go. Behind the Augiers and Herman and Schuller was a sliding Colin Bond, who had crept to equal third with Chapman and MacArthur to become the hope of the Holden team. Of the 159 who'd started from Alice, 5,000 miles back, 122 were still in at Melbourne. The Colts seemed set for the team's prize. As for John Kieran, he just never gave up. Chapman in Albury, quiet and confident. But before dawn, it would be all over. The Capri wrapped around a telegraph pole. Chapman in hospital with 3 fractures in his left leg. But Alison Parker and Carol Waldron in their Datsun had the girls' section sewn up. 1,066 points down, but still tops for the girls. Dawn on day 14, heading for Cooma. Could the Augiers retain their lead for 24 hours? Overnight, we all dropped points, but not sufficient to alter the placings. On long, hard hauls in Victoria, the Augiers paced the roads magnificently. With less power in their Datsun, Herman and Schuller dropped to 17 points behind them. But they were still second, and Bond was third, and the hunt was on. stake, top end of the $35,750 prize money and the prestige. The quarry the teams had chased 10,000 miles across Australia. The honour the French and German crews had flown 10,000 miles to win. Tension is high and time precious. Herman and Schuller were in trouble at Numarella, just outside Cooma. The engine flange of their exhaust pipe had snapped. Schuller patched it by the roadside. Then they raced to Cooma, where their service team was waiting. Clattering into Cooma, they headed for the most urgent repairs they had yet undertaken. In credit to their Datsun, it was the first part which had come adrift since their rollover near Oodnadatta. From Cooma to Canberra, the route instructions warned that icy road conditions could apply. They did. The Augiers were unwavering, but the Germans were magnificent. Now they picked up points. 5 precious points on the Augiers on the tight forest sections before Canberra. Now the French-German duel was really on. Ten days earlier, we'd been in Western Queensland with Kieran the leader, and the dust impenetrable. Now skiers saw us on our way, a way that was nearly ended as the last night drew on. 100 miles to go to Canberra, with Australia's hopes now resting on Colin Bond, whose Monaro was still good enough to win. Canberra, 12 points worried Herman and Schuller. Could they pick them up? Time in which the Augiers could meet ill fortune was fast running out. All that was left now was the night run into the dawn of the final day. No wonder both French and German crews took care with their final thorough service checks. After 14 days, there was a mere 480 miles to go. Then it happened. 3 hours out of Canberra, the Augiers' luck ran out. They should have been first into Trunky. Lost tight control in the trial. But Bond was first, then Herman and Schuller. Where was the white Citroën? Herman had the answer. 200 miles back, they took a wrong turn and lost 12 minutes. The slip he'd been waiting for. If he could get back the disputed San Isidore point, he'd win the trial. Then out of the night, a furious Frenchwoman and an even more furious Frenchman. They'd not lost the trial. They'd not lost 12 points. The route instructions were wrong. They were going to protest, and protest they did within the hour. Sunday, a procession down the Great Western Highway to Sydney Showground, and rather a triumphant one. Pride of place to the joint provisional winners. Provisional because officially they'd both lost 60 points, including the Augiers' disputed 12 and the Germans' disputed 1. The moment we'd set out for, 15 days and 10,000 miles before, had arrived. And it belonged to the Ogiers, to Herman and Schuller, to Colin Bond, Brian Hope and Tony Roberts, third in their big Monaro, and to the little colts who took the coveted team's prize, finishing 5th, 6th and 7th. A clean sweep in their class, plus second in the rally. Lesser prizes, almost as much glory, and certainly the biggest and widest smiles in the showground. The novice winners, Burns, Connerty and Glendenning, another Datsun 1600. Other novices collected Omegas from Prouds. And the most successful women's crew, Alison Parker and Carol Waldron, a Datsun 1200. No prize, but a lap of honor for John Kieran. Then a sporting rapprochement. Jean-Claude and Lucette, Edgar and Hans withdrew their protests. They accepted the tie which they had first disputed, a tie which gave them each $6,500 in AMPOL prize money, plus $3,700 in special prize money and bonuses to the Germans.